Good afternoon and welcome to this Baptists Together webinar. Today we're going to be looking at church amalgamations, or mergers as it's also commonly known. My name is Sanderson and I'm the Legal Services Manager here at the Baptist Union, and today I'm joined by my colleague Dan, who's our property paralegal. Today we're going to be looking at a few different aspects of amalgamations and mergers, but we're going to take you through what it means, the kinds of amalgamations that you may come across, and thinking particularly about considerations around your church properties. We'll look also at governance, particularly church constitutions, and what you'll need to consider when amalgamating with another church. And then we'll also look at some of the more practical issues like appointing solicitors and consultation with other third parties. And finally, we'll talk about where you can get help if you're considering this with your church. And at the end, there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions either in the chat we'll be answering those at the end. But do put those into the chat box as you're going along for this live webinar. So what is an amalgamation or a merger in a Baptist church context? Well, it is usually where you have two or sometimes more churches that join together to form a single church, a single worshipping community. And we have seen a number of churches where this has been more than two churches, but invariably it's just between two churches. And it is a legal process that will often require what we call an amalgamation agreement, which will specifically go into the property and trust arrangements for the properties that both churches are bringing together. When might an amalgamation or merger arise? Well, often we find, and particularly coming out of the pandemic, that a merger has been seen by smaller, perhaps struggling churches as a way of avoiding closure. Often it's painful for a church and its members to consider closure when a church is struggling perhaps with the numbers of members, or to recruit, appoint charity trustees from within the church. And so sometimes a merger or an amalgamation with another local Baptist church is an opportunity to bring the two churches together and revitalise what would otherwise have been a struggling Baptist church cause. Often these two churches or three churches will have already been working closely together within the local community, perhaps having joint activities within the community, and sometimes also joint services. And because of those close ties, it sometimes is just a natural progression for the two churches to want to formally merge or amalgamate their activities and join as one church. But it's important for your church charity trustees to always consider what is in the best interests of both of your church charities. And I've popped on the slide the point about the right timing, because we have seen on occasions smaller churches who, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, are perhaps thinking about their inability to go on as a church, and they may have to close, and they want a very clear timeline. They have a date in mind by which they want to be released from the responsibilities of running their church. But sometimes a larger church may not be quite ready to plant into that new church or to work together with that church formally by way of an amalgamation. So the timing has to be right for all of the churches that are coming together. And so a way of guaranteeing that, or ensuring that that all of your interests are aligned, is to be in close contact with both leadership teams. The trustees of both churches should be talking to each other and exploring the ways in which this might work. So there are two common types of amalgamation that we see with our churches. This one we've just called the standard amalgamation, but invariably this is where you'll have one or two similar churches, two or more similar churches that will be probably in the same geographical area, not necessarily in the same town, but close enough to be working together and be making use of the buildings. And these churches will come together to form a new church. So you've got two different churches that will form a completely new church. So in essence, the two churches already in existence will almost cease to exist when they transfer all of their assets and liabilities to this new church entity. And the new church will therefore come under a new governance structure. It will probably have a whole new constitution possibly a new church name, and all of the members and assets and activities from the 2 or 3 churches will come together and there will be a new church entity created. The other type of amalgamation or merger that we see is what we've nicknamed a rescue merger or a takeover merger, where you might have, as I've alluded to, a smaller, perhaps struggling church that is uncertain about its future. And it may be in close contact with a larger church in the area that is thriving, that has sufficient trustees, they've got lots of activities going on, and some really good opportunities to perhaps use the church buildings of the smaller church and its assets and those members that they still have to come together under the large church's structure. So what will happen is that larger church will remain in existence, will probably still retain the same name, although not necessarily. And the smaller church members and assets will come under that larger church's structure, so they'll all be taken into that structure. And so that's the sort of rescue merger type amalgamation that we also regularly see with our churches.
Thank you, Caroline. It's critical that amalgamation isn't just the vision of one church charity trustee, and we recommend that the leadership teams of both churches meet together and agree that amalgamation is appropriate for the church. And if both churches are in agreement, if the leadership teams both agree that amalgamation is suitable, that the churches are doctrinally aligned, then we recommend that churches begin the process of consulting various parties early in the process. Firstly, we recommend that churches consult their regional Baptist associations. They can support the churches to make sure that they are theologically aligned and that they can have services together. Next, we recommend that churches consult their trust corporation. And the trust corporation is the holding trustee, the property trustee, which holds the church assets on trust for the church. And this could be the Baptist Union Corporation, or the Yorkshire Baptist Association, or indeed the London Baptist Property Board. And the benefit of consulting the trust corporation is that they can advise on what trusts are in place for the church properties. And they can also check to see if model trusts are in place for the church properties. And these are helpful in that they contain modern administrative provisions relating to the sale of property and also to accessing trust funds. But having them in place is not essential to an amalgamation. And finally, we've included the Baptist pension scheme. It's important to consult with them because it must be considered whether an amalgamation will amount to a cessation event under a Baptist minister's pension scheme. So if a Baptist minister's pension is being privately funded, not through the Baptist pension scheme, then this isn't relevant. But if they are, then do consult Steve Caney. His contact details are on the slides. And it's also important to consult the ultimate trust beneficiaries, or also known as an ultimate beneficiary. So what is an ultimate beneficiary? Well, often in old church deeds, there's an ultimate beneficiary, and this is a party that is specified that in the event of church closure, such that the property is sold, then the proceeds would be given to an ultimate beneficiary. And this could be the Home Mission Fund of the Baptist Union, or the Baptist Building CIO, or indeed the particular Baptist Fund. And often their consent is required for an amalgamation to be effective. And from the perspective of the Baptist Union Corporation, the BUC, we expect that ultimate trust beneficiaries would be a party, a signatory to an amalgamation agreement. And often ultimate beneficiaries will require a valuation of the church properties to safeguard their interests in the amalgamation?
So when we talk about amalgamations and bringing these property assets together, it's important to understand that that can often be multiple properties. So for example, if you have two churches that are coming together, both churches are likely to have a church building, but they may also have at least one or sometimes more than one residential property or manse as well. So you could be talking about potentially 3 or 4 or 5 properties that are being brought together into this one new structure. And with those individual properties, there will also be separate trust arrangements for each of those properties. And for church properties, often we will find when we're looking at the trusts that you have parcels of land that have been accumulated over a period of years that are all now part of that church site. But again, each of those individual parcels of land may often have different trusts relating to them. So it's important that your trust corporation, together with the solicitors that you appoint, will review these trusts to identify who those ultimate beneficiaries that Dan has mentioned are in relation to each of those parcels of land. So there are a range of ultimate beneficiaries, as Dan has explained. And so what we do is we pool the assets. All of the property assets will be pooled. After they've been valued, they'll then be assigned a percentage. And the ultimate beneficiaries will then have a percentage assigned to them so that if the amalgamated church closes in the future, their percentage in relation to the ultimate trusts and the value of the property is easily identifiable. So by way of example, because it's a little complicated, I've just lifted a section, a provision from a standard amalgamation agreement here for you. And different trust corporations may appoint different solicitors and may have slightly different wording in their amalgamation agreements. But this is a standard clause that you would find in a Baptist Union Corporation document. So in the event of closure of the amalgamated church, i.e. once all of the assets are pooled, such that the ultimate trusts under the property trusts are triggered, all of the parties to this agreement confirm that they will regard the property or any proceeds of sale held by the trust corporation on behalf of that amalgamated church as forming a pool of properties to be sold. And the decisions of use about the proceeds of sale will then be decided as between, and I've put here for an example, the particular Baptist fund or the Baptist building fund. So they might have a certain percentage, then the Baptist Union, if it's a sole ultimate beneficiary under a parcel of land, might have an additional percentage. For example, if there are model trusts where it's shared between the Baptist Union and a regional association, they'll have a percentage. And sometimes we find in property trusts that it will be for the members to decide what happens to the sale proceeds upon closure. So that's why there could be an additional share of the sale proceeds at the end that would be decided by the church members of the amalgamated church. So that's just to give you an idea of how the properties would all come together, and when we've assessed the trusts and the valuations of the properties have been done, we would be able to identify upon closure in the future what share of those assets would go to the different ultimate beneficiaries. It's also really important to consider governance when you're thinking about a merger. So your church may already have what we consider a suitable constitution for a Baptist church. So we have a couple of what we call approved governing documents that are constitutions that the Charity Commission, as well as the Baptist Union Council, have approved for use for our Baptist churches. That's not always going to be the case, and certainly with smaller churches where they are perhaps, have been struggling for some time, they may also have a constitution that is outdated and no longer fit for purpose. So it's important when coming together as a new church to consider the suitability of your church constitution in both types of merger. It might also be appropriate for your merging church to consider incorporation at this time, and this charitable incorporated organisation structure, which is a limited liability structure, a corporate structure, is one that we recommend for churches as a means of future-proofing your charity, protecting your charity trustees from personal liability. So it might be that this would be an opportunity, whilst you're considering the amalgamation agreement and the property trust, to also think about incorporation for your merged church charity. Bear in mind too that if you're bringing together two churches that are similar sizes, but perhaps separately were not registered charities, if the income of that merged church exceeds £100,000 once the church is merged, then that would automatically trigger mandatory registration with the Charity Commission too. So that is something you'll need to consider. It is also, of course, important to involve your members in this significant decision in the life of your church meeting and your church. So we would expect there to be, after the trustees have had those initial conversations and feel that it's the right thing to put to the members, of course, there to be a special members meeting resolution to approve the amalgamation and the transfer of the assets to the merged church. I also wanted to flag at this point in this presentation the fact that there are new provisions which are going to amend the current Charities Act 2011. So the Charities Act 2022 is going to be introducing new provisions in relation to charity mergers. Now, these are not actually going to come into force in relation to charity mergers until autumn 2023, but it is helpful, I think, for you to know that merged charities from that point will be deemed to have continued in existence for the purposes of receiving a legacy. So churches where wills name one of the churches that has merged into the amalgamated or merged church, that legacy would still be deemed to have passed to the merged church. And that will also remove the need for what we call shell charities that no longer hold any assets, but they're kept alive currently to be the beneficiary of legacies on a register of mergers. That will remove the need for retaining those shell charities. So that will be helpful when it comes into force next autumn.
Thank you, Caroline. So on appointing solicitors, we recommend that churches instruct Anthony Collins solicitors based in Birmingham. They are, of course, the retained solicitors for the Baptist Union Corporation and the Baptist Union of Great Britain. And we recommend Anthony Collins because they not only have a charity law expertise, but they understand Baptist churches and Baptist governance. We've included Esther Campsell's contact details on the presentation slides. But of course, the churches can also instruct the solicitors that their trust corporation uses. But in any case, it's important that solicitors have a charity law expertise. So on timescales, generally, amalgamations take 1 year to complete from the date that the solicitors are first instructed, but many variables are involved, and an amalgamation can take considerably longer. Rescue mergers can be achieved more quickly, and a more light touch approach may be possible, especially if one of the merging churches has no property. So legal costs. Well, legal costs depend on many factors: the type of amalgamation, the number of properties involved, the identity of the ultimate trust beneficiaries, and any pension scheme considerations. But generally, by way of an indication, costs can be in the region of £4,000 plus VAT. But of course, every church amalgamation is different, and the costs and timescales can vary considerably. It should also be borne in mind that with ultimate beneficiaries being involved, churches may have to incur valuation fees where the ultimate beneficiaries require a surveyor's report for the properties. And also, ultimate beneficiaries may require that churches also bear their legal fees in relation to the amalgamation. So, practical issues. Well, as a result of amalgamation, it may be that the most important issue for the church is the church name. And this is particularly the case in relation to standard amalgamations where two equally sized churches form a new church entity with new governance arrangements. So on this point, we recommend that you have a look on the Baptist Together website and consult our guidelines leaflet C10. On banking arrangements, do check that the church's bank mandate that the existing signatories of the bank account can continue to manage the account going forwards. Do also contact your utility supplier so that they can send statements and invoices to the right entity, and also contact the church's insurers too. And with the church's tenancy and hiring arrangements, that's where third parties using the church property do notify them in the case of the new landlord or who is to be the church that is allowing the hiring arrangements to take place. And finally, on regulatory issues, it's very likely that churches are registered as places of worship, and also for the solemnization of marriages. Do contact your local register office so that there's a single registration profile for the newly amalgamated church. And also consider notifying the Charity Commission, and this can apply where both churches are already registered and need to have one registration profile, or if, as a result of the amalgamation, registration is required with the Charity Commission. So, where to get help? Do liaise with your regional Baptist association and also the church's trust corporation or their property trustees. Remember, that could be the Baptist Union Corporation or the Yorkshire Baptist Association or the London Baptist Property Board.
Or HEBA or WebNet.
Indeed. And very helpfully on the Baptist Together website, there's a guidelines leaflet LO4, Church Amalgamations and Mergers, and the web links there. And if you do have any questions, please do email the legal and operations team on the email address shown on the slides. So now we have an opportunity to answer any questions you may have.
So we're waiting for any questions that may come in. I could also add that this webinar is part of a suite of webinars that we have on our website. So if you go to baptist.org.uk/webinars, you can find a range of webinars that we have produced in relation to finance and legal issues, as well as listed buildings. So do take a look. Have we got any tips for making a merger go smoothly? I think the key to that really is the consultation, to make sure that you are talking to all of those entities that we referred to. So your regional association, who will have helped a number of churches go through amalgamations and mergers, and who will help you perhaps even with the church members' meetings. And regional ministers will often attend church meetings if they're asked to provide support for those. The Trust Corporation also will have seen a number of types of mergers, and they'll be able to help you. And eventually you will, of course, need to instruct solicitors who will guide you through the legal process. But do take a look at our guideline leaflet, and then you can always ask us any questions or send any emails to us, and we'll be more than happy to answer any questions that you may have, or pick up the phone and have a chat with either of us. We'll be happy to chat with you. Well, if there's no further questions, we'll leave it there. I hope this is helpful, and do get in touch if you need any further support. Many thanks.